Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming today, and you are very welcome to the first SEAC committee meeting of the year. Particularly, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our new members of the committee. So we've got Councillor Ray, Councillor Rowntree, Councillor Bromley, Councillor Stables. You're very welcome onto our committee, and a very warm welcome to everybody who's been and come back. So we're going to start with introductions. You'll notice that we have a very young member with us today, so I hope you'll make him feel very welcome when he introduces himself. So, as I said, my name's Katie Dye, Councillor for Killingbeck and Seacroft. Shall we move that way?
Good afternoon, Polly Cook, the Chief Officer for Climate, Energy and Green Spaces.
Rachel Wainwright, Policy Officer, Climate, Energy and Green Spaces.
Good afternoon. My name is Mohammed Hussain and I'm the Leeds Children's Mayor.
Hi, I'm Adele Ray and I'm the new councillor for Bramley and Stanningley.
Hi, I'm Councillor John Tudor for Killingbeck and Seacroft Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Peter Carlill, Carville and Farsley Ward.
Afternoon, everyone. Councillor Andy Rowntree from Kirkstall Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Bromley, representing Horsforth and Rawdon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Mohammed Shazad Motown and Meanwood Ward.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mohammed Rafiq, Chaplarton Ward, and I'm also the Exec Board Member for Climate, Energy, Environment and Green Spaces. Thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm Councillor Penny Stables from Wetherby Ward.
Good afternoon, I'm Councillor Norma Harrington from Wetherby Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Barry Anderson, Adland Wharfdale Ward.
Good afternoon, Toby Russell, Clerk for the committee.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for being with us today. So, just for new members, I will always assume that you've read the papers for the meetings, so I hope you have. And I always encourage you to ask questions, so please feel free as we go through the agenda items to do that. We're going to start with Toby going through the formalities, please.
Thank you, Chair. So item number 1, there's no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Item number 2, there's no exempt information on today's agenda. Item number 3, there are no formal late items. Item number 4, can I ask members to declare any interest? Thank you. And agenda item number 5 is apologies. I've not received any formal apologies, but I believe we're still waiting on Councillor Newton and Councillor Downs, and I'll note them accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is the minutes of the previous meeting. So what I do with minutes is go through them page by page, and then if there's anything that you'd like to raise as either a matter of correction or a matter arising from those minutes, then please just put your hand up and we'll bring you in. Okay. So the first page is page 5. Page 6. Page 7. Page 8. So I've just got 3 things that I want to pick up on page 8, and it's the last 3 bullet points that we were going to receive feedback from the director that came to the meeting on social worker electric vehicle trials, adaptation in schools and other sites, and teacher workshops. So I don't think we've had that yet, have we? So could we just raise that as something that we need to get chased up and get some feedback to ourselves on, please? Thank you. Page 9. Page 10. Page 11. Page 12. And page 13. Okay, thank you very much. So let's agree those as a true record of our meeting. And Councillor Downs, before we go any further, would you like to officially introduce yourself, please?
Okay. Sorry I'm late, Chair. I got stuck in some traffic. Councillor Rick Downs from Otley and Eden Ward.
Thank you very much. Councillor Tudor?
Is Councillor Bowden still on the SEAC? He's not. I think when the agenda got sent out, the front cover he must have still been on it. That's what it is. Thank you.
Yep. So Councillor Bowden's no longer on the committee, but we have Councillor Rowntree in Councillor Bowden's place. So he's now going to be a permanent member of the committee. Okay, so thank you very much. So that moves us on to item 7. So for new members of the committee, at each committee meeting, we have a slot called open forum. And at the open forum, we invite individuals or groups who have something that they would like to talk to us about that's related to our remit as a climate emergency advisory committee. To come along, and they can have a 5-minute slot. And we've had some really interesting contributions over the past few meetings. We had a really good one last meeting from Bumblebee Conservation Society, and we've had schools and community groups in the past come and tell us about things that they're doing. So if any of you know any groups or individuals who'd like to come, then please ask them to get in touch, and we'd be really happy to have them as a slot. So that's just a little bit of an introduction about what it is and how it works for new members of the committee. So we are very, very lucky today to have our current children's mayor, Mohammed, who's got a presentation, I think, that Rachel's going to go through. So I'm going to hand over to you, and you can just talk us through it. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, members of the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee. My name is Mohammed Hussain, and I am honoured to have the opportunity to share with you the impactful work I have been involved in as Leeds Children's Mayor in this year towards addressing the climate emergency in our community. Today, I will share the environmental initiatives and projects I've been involved in over the past year. I attended and participated in over 27 events, talks, and projects aimed at raising awareness about climate change. I will share some of those most important moments with you today. At Islandwood Primary School, many workshops were presented by Incredible Edible for various year groups in cooperation with the Eco Council. We created an organic garden at the school, which is one of my manifesto points. The workshops focused on sustainable practices and educating students on growing their own food. In collaboration with Fruitworks Co-op, our Eco Council and I planted an apple tree to replace a fallen cherry tree. It's wonderful to leave this lasting gift at Islandwood Primary School before I leave the school next year. At Islandwood Primary School, we started a composting scheme, reducing waste and turning fruit scraps into valuable fertilizer, helping to secure several trees for the next academic year from the Woodland Trust. This initiative will increase greenery, improve air quality, and provide educational opportunities for students. In cooperation with local councillors in our school ward, we organised a community litter pick. This event helped clean our community and raised awareness about the impact of litter. I propose that this event be held twice a year from now onwards. In May 2024, we launched a very successful initiative at Islandwood Primary School as part of my manifesto, encouraging pupils and parents to walk to school. The scheme garnered positive results and contributed significantly to improving air quality in the area. All these activities have made our school and community greener, inspired students to be more mindful of their environmental impact. As we often emphasize, it's the small actions that collectively create a significant change. As part of my manifesto, I participated in distributing an incredible toolkit to all young people in Leeds. It teaches the vital importance of combating climate change and provides actionable steps to do so effectively. I want everyone to take more action to protect the environment from climate change, including teachers, adults, and young people too. I want every young person to use this toolkit to know how to take climate action themselves. We can be a city that leads by example. I had the privilege of visiting the Winter Coat campaign at Noel Mount Community Centre to show my support for the incredible efforts of the organisers and volunteers. I had the privilege of representing the children of Leeds at Coral, where I shared our city's commitment to creating a better future. Leeds, with its strong sense of community and dedication to initiatives like tackling climate change, reducing poverty, and supporting children's mental health, is leading the way. It was a great honour to visit various locations and raise awareness about climate change, witnessing incredible initiatives like those at Grimsdyke Primary School. During my visit to Grimsdyke Primary School, I had the opportunity to learn about their efforts towards creating a greener Leeds. Additionally, I explored Temple Newsam, where I was impressed by their farm and the diverse range of animals they cared for. We were thrilled to have runners from Running Out of Time and Councillor Mohammed Rafiq visit Islandwood Primary School. It was wonderful to be part of their journey. As a final request, I would like to ask the councillors to share the Climate Action Route Map and Guide with other schools. By doing this, we can ensure that more students and schools are equipped with the knowledge and tools to contribute to our fight against climate change. In conclusion, I am proud of the progress we have made this year in addressing the climate emergency, but there is still much work to be done. By continuing to collaborate and take decisive action, we can create a more resilient and sustainable future for generations to come. Thank you for your attention and support.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mohammed, for coming and talking to us today. You've done an amazing job in terms of the work that you've been doing, but also the way that you put that together and the way you spoke to us. It was very, very impressive. We are really happy to support you, and I wish you an awful lot of success with the rest of your year as Children's Mayor. Thank you very much. Shall we have another round of applause? Thank you. You are free to go. Okay, so I think we will find that very hard to beat. Moving on to our next item. So we were kind of conscious that with us being in an election period today, we have to be a little bit more careful as a committee. So we had a little bit of a think about some of the agenda items that we thought would be appropriate to discuss. And one of the things that, well, I have to give all credit to Polly and Rachel for is the idea that it would be really good, particularly for new members, to have an overview of what Leeds has been doing and where we are as a city. And I don't think it'll hurt any of the rest of us. One thing that you will find as your year on SEAC moves on is that we're often, as committee members, asked to comment on things that Leeds is doing, and we're expected to kind of be the experts in terms of the council members. So I think it would be a really good thing for us to have a little bit of an overview. It'll set new members up for the year, and then we'll be able to be in a really good position to comment on things. And of course, you know, as the year goes on, we're the ones who are going to be scrutinising the work that the council's doing. And as I've said earlier, it'd be really great if, as the committee year rolls on, you are able to ask lots of good questions, and information is key in terms of that. So that's our first agenda item. It's an overview of the mitigation and adaptation work in Leeds, and we are moving to, is it Rachel or Polly going to present? Okay, thank you very much.
So we're going to do a double act, but I'm going to start. So Rachel's going to bring the presentation up. Just really conscious of the kind of political environment at the moment. So I have consciously steered clear of mentioning targets. So that's a conscious decision. So the department that I lead has responsibility for the climate policy for the council, but we also do quite a lot of delivery. However, it's really critical that every part of the council is working with us on climate change. So today what I focused on is more where we have a direct hand in delivery, but over the course of the year we'll hear from colleagues in planning or transport. So I wouldn't want anyone to go away with an idea that this is all we're doing, but we would have been here for about 3 weeks if we'd done everything the council's doing. So it's a flavour. So I think it's really important that, I think as time's gone on, it's really clear that we are already experiencing climate adaptation. So I think the focus in sort of earlier years has always been about reducing our carbon emissions and actually making sure that we don't hit that 2-degree increase in temperature. However, we're already seeing and experiencing climate change within Leeds, and certainly across other parts of the world that's more pronounced. And so when we look at climate change within the committee, it's really important that we look at both sides of mitigation in terms of reducing our contribution, but adaptation in terms of how we get the city ready for the changes that we start to see. One thing that we are really proud of as a city is our carbon disclosure project score. So actually this is an assessment that's done globally. So it's done by an independent body, and they look at what we're doing as a city for both mitigation and adaptation, and then score that and give us advice on how we can strengthen it. And every year achieving that grade gets harder. So it's not something where the criteria stay the same and you just, you put the same response in, you'll get the same score. You have to be showing continual improvement. And for example, adaptation probably in the earlier years was less demanding because they were sort of recognising that was a new area. As time's gone on, that will become more and more demanding. They'll expect to see cities doing more. So, it's a great position to have. However, it is something that we want to strive to keep, and it's something that allows us to sort of benchmark what we're doing, and if we have areas of weakness, to actually ask other cities and look at what other cities are doing, and it gives us some visibility. I said at the beginning that it's really important that we don't just focus on what my service does, but actually what the whole council does. It's equally as important that we're really outward looking, because actually no one organisation is going to be able to deliver net zero or adapt a location. So we've just put up there an example of some of the organisations we work with. So there's actually 2 climate commissions that operate within the city. There's the Leeds Climate Commission that came along first, and they're both part of the Place-Based Climate Action Network. So the Leeds Climate Commission brings in a lot of the large organisations like the University of Leeds, but it also brings in businesses, and it's just a forum where actually we can do that kind of information sharing. We can look at sort of bigger projects, and then the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission does that on an even bigger scale. And the importance of something like the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission is people like Yorkshire Water or the Environment Agency, they don't work within our council boundaries. So actually it's much more efficient for them to work across all the local authorities on areas at once. And also the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission link in with all the Yorkshire universities in terms of research opportunities. So it allows us to kind of look more at that kind of innovation. Then we have Climate Action Leeds, which is more of a community-led event, again linked to the University of Leeds. But that's looking at actually community action and the number of different community hubs across the city. And actually we've heard from a number of them at this forum during Open Forum. We have things like the Anchor Institutes, which University of Leeds is one, but also all the other big public sectors. So if you were to list the sort of largest energy users across the city, they would all be the public sector organisations. So actually in terms of contribution, it would be the public sector organisations who would make the biggest impact first. And then you'd get down to some of the industrial users within the city, but actually the public sector like university or council has a bigger energy bill than any of those at the moment. We also linked things like core cities, so that we're making sure we're seeing what other core cities are doing. If there's points of government policy that we want to work together on, we work with those. We work with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. And I think one of the key sort of ethos of the way we work is actually, if Leeds gets to net zero and nobody else does, we've achieved nothing, because actually it will make no difference to the outcome. So actually in the climate arena, it is really about trying to learn from others and help others go quicker, and also be willing to be open and to learn. So just some of the terminology that you might hear during the time at the committee, and we try really hard not to fall into terminology, but you do by default sometimes. Tend to refer to scope 1 and 2 together, really. So a lot of organisations, when they talk about their carbon footprint, really focus on scope 1 and 2. So scope 1 and 2 would be your gas, electricity, and also the fuel that you might use to power your own vehicles. So that's where from the example of the council, that would be where the council is directly paying for that electricity, gas, or petrol or diesel. So that would be our kind of carbon footprint. What we're becoming more and more focused on is scope 3. So scope 3 would be everything we procure. So if we pay somebody, I'm trying to think of something we pay for, a construction contract, for example, or somebody to repair our roads, actually it's the carbon footprint of that work that's undertaken. So a really easy way to reduce your carbon footprints would be to outsource everything. If you weren't looking at scope 3, suddenly your carbon footprint would look a lot better, which is why it's really important that you look at the whole picture and include scope 3. It also would include, so for example, as a council, we pay people to use their own cars and to use mileage, for example, in certain aspects. And that would fall into scope 3, as would something like business travel. So it just gives you a much better picture of what an organisation is doing. And that is really underdeveloped at the moment, globally, not just within Leeds, because it's really difficult to kind of measure that data. So we're starting to get into that more. Some bits are easier to measure than others. But that's something that a lot more work needs to happen on. And the estimates are that could be somewhere between 80 to 90% of an organisation's emissions. So actually, it's not, you shouldn't just ignore it. And sometimes your scope 3 will be someone else's scope 1 and 2. So actually the way that you procure and how you actually ask people those questions about, how they're controlling their emissions become more important. Just to give a bit of a flavour in terms of where emissions come from. So the first line on each of those bar charts is 2005, and then you've got the comparison of 2021. So what you see is that, for example, the domestic sector has dropped much more dramatically, as has the commercial and public. A lot of that will be due to the electrification of the grid, sorry, not the electrification, the decarbonisation of the grid. So there's been a lot of work as a country in terms of how we improve the production of electricity, and that's what's leading to that reduction in the domestic emissions. In the commercial and public sector, you can see that's even more marked, and that's because there's been quite a lot of investment in the commercial and public sector in terms of starting to decarbonise our own buildings. So it's not just the electrification of grid, it's the investment in different technologies or the retrofitting. Whereas transport, there has been a reduction, and you can see it by looking around. We're starting to get electric buses, more electric vehicles, but that is taking longer overall in terms of when you look at things like train decarbonisation, things that hasn't happened as quickly. So now I'm just going to go on to talk about a couple of examples of sort of some of the leading work that we're doing. So Leeds Pipes is our district heating network that's been set up. So it's connected to our energy from waste plant. So it uses the waste from our black bins as the city goes. The energy from waste plant is burnt, creates electricity, and then that waste heat is taken from that plant and piped around the city to heat buildings. So it displaces gas, is much more low carbon. Got to go on to the next. Thanks. And also the real benefit with the district heating versus some of the other environmentally friendly technologies that are out there is it's much easier to retrofit a building like the one we're in today, the Civic Hall, without having to make major adaptations. So this building is actually heated by district heating, as is the town hall, as are some of the other, like the courts or the playhouse. And because we haven't had to do major retrofit works in order for that to work, it can perform in a very similar way to gas with similar temperatures. Ultimately, you'd want to get it down to working at lower temperatures to make it more efficient, but it allows us to start to decarbonise at a much quicker rate. It's been a major investment for the council with lots of that funding. We've had probably about half of that funding has also come from grant from about 3 or 4 different sources. And we are in the really early phase. I think we probably use about 20% of the available heat at the moment. So we're looking to expand further along the hedgerow down into the south part of the city. But it just gives an alternative. And actually the policy network for district heating is really progressing. So actually by about 2025, there will be policies in place that actually mandate certain buildings to connect to district heating, and you'll start to see other heating networks develop over the city. So that's just a quick summary, and it's something that we've always been quite keen to show people and take people on a tour. So if there's people that want to do that because it's something they're not familiar with, but it's something quite that for us is a flagship project that's been going on probably about 8 years, I think. But we've progressed. We're probably in about the 4th stage of expansion now. The public sector decarbonisation is a grant stream that came online probably 3 or 4 years ago and is really focused on the public sector, as it says in the title. We were really successful in the first round. We got about £40 million worth of funding, and we used that to focus on our most energy intensive buildings, so leisure centres primarily. We also did some schools. We used it to help us with our connection to district heating for some of our city centre buildings. The primary focus on it, it's as the funding's moved on, it's progressed. So now the primary focus of that funding is about decarbonising heat, which is right, because actually gas is the one thing that we really need to be focusing on. So it's moving across to things like ground source, air source, heat pumps, or even other electric forms of heating. What we've been really careful to do when we look at that is to look at how you balance the increased use of electricity, because gas is a cheaper form of heat, so we don't raise electricity bills. And that's why with most of our schemes, you'll see solar alongside it, to try and balance that overall revenue impact, especially for things like some of the primary schools. But during that project, I was trying to remember the figures, but I think we're probably up to about 60 to 70 sites that we've looked at, and put solar and air source or ground source heat pumps in, and we will continue to bid for that. The way the funding works has changed, and this is a big challenge for us as time goes on, that the criteria keep changing. And on this, it's likely the criteria will be done on value for money, and we will struggle more with that because we've been really successful on the earlier rounds. We've done all the buildings that provide the best value for money, so leisure centres, and the minute you start to go down to smaller buildings, they will never be as cost effective to decarbonise. So that makes it more challenging for us, but we won't give up. We'll keep trying. So this just gives you a bit of a flavour for electric vehicles within Leeds and sort of the growth. So you can see it's been fairly rapid over the last couple of years. And I think you can see that even if you're out and about, the number of green number plates is increasing. And actually, if we had this graph with other cities on, you'll see that actually Leeds has sort of crept ahead in terms of the way that growth has happened. And to go. And just in terms of charge points, so the local authority on the left is obviously Leeds, and then that just shows the UK. So we're about on average for both, really, slightly under in terms of number of charges per 100,000 people, but slightly above in terms of rapid charges. And there's a significant amount of work going on at the moment to increase the number of charges through a number of different funding streams that have been secured, and also work nationally looking at actually how do you help people who don't have off-street parking, and finding some different options for those, which has been one of the bigger challenges for us. In terms of social housing, we committed to invest about 100 million retrofitting council housing back in 2021. So by 2023, 60 million had been spent in terms of improving housing stock. So the one that you can see on the right in terms of the tower blocks shows a block that's been, my goodness, my word's gone, externally insulated, external wall insulation, but it will have also had ground source heat pumps. So we'll be looking at a ground source heat pump that then heats all those different blocks. It works on like a small district heating network, and that's happening across the city. So again, starting to provide a better source of heat. A lot of our tower blocks relied on storage heaters, which were actually really difficult for customers to use, because you have to anticipate how much heat you want when you want it to work. Whereas with this, it's much more like you'd experience with a domestic boiler, where you turn it on and off as you want it. So not only is it lower carbon, but it provides much better living conditions for people, and helps reduce bills and better control. But there's also been work done in different estates. So in the Holtdales, we've seen an almost complete retrofit of housing, taking it down to near to net zero as we can get. And similar, we've done work with landlords, where actually landlords have invested money. We've done external wall insulation, doors, and more efficient sort of heating systems, and actually some of the benefits from that. So for example, we've had households where they've said it's not just improved their living conditions and reduced their fuel bills, but actually it's meant that their kids are getting an education. And when you start to dig into that, you've got families who previously would have been living in one room because the house was too difficult to heat. So actually, by making that house fit for purpose, actually the kid can now go and work in their bedroom and do their schoolwork rather than sitting with their younger siblings and being disturbed. So some of the changes that you experience are really quite big, beyond maybe what anybody might anticipate. And I'm going to hand over to Rachel now to take us through adaptation.
Thank you. So yeah, similar to what Polly was doing for more the mitigation side, I was just going to run through sort of the definitions of climate adaptation and some of the work that we've been doing. Obviously keep going with, to make sure that we can obviously continue to do what we do for people who live and work in the city and visit the city, to make sure that climate doesn't interrupt that. So in terms of the general aims of climate adaptation, as you can see on the screen, we see it as the 3 Ps primarily. So prevent, protect and prepare. So obviously preventing hazards occurring, protecting a city from harm and damage, and preparing to respond effectively to an occurring hazard. And there's effectively sort of a 4th aim in there as well, which is actions that enable the city to quickly recover after a hazard has occurred. Obviously, ideally that the 4th one isn't really reached. We like to make sure that obviously it's one of the first 3 ideally. But we have to make sure that we consider how to best balance these 4 aims in terms of addressing an event that might happen. So in terms of risks for Leeds itself, we see it as 4 different categories as such. So we see it as heat, flooding, drought and cascading impacts. And just for sort of a definition of cascading impacts, it'd be something similar to if there was certain types of food unavailable due to adverse weather, say on the continent, that would be sort of an example of that. Obviously, we've seen the heat wave back in 2022 in July for the heat wave that we experienced. Obviously, as of yet this year, we've not really seen those kind of heat waves. But that doesn't mean to say that they won't be obviously sort of potentially appearing. And then obviously flooding, we'll speak more about that shortly, but obviously the imagery on there is sort of reflective of 2015 Boxing Day floods on Kirkstall Road. And as we all know, there's obviously just last year we had the hosepipe ban as well, and there's the threat of drought that we're to bear in mind as well. So it's just a few more images. These are, I'm sure a lot of you remember the Boxing Day floods in Kirkstall, in and around Kirkstall, in 2015. So that's just a stark reminder of those particular events. What we try to do is, as well, is it's kind of sometimes it can be useful to have these imagery and the reflections from teams, and we actually work with teams throughout the council to understand how they actually felt during that time as a service, what they would have liked to have had in preparation ready. So we kind of use it as a base point and a sort of a strong memory for people to actually use that to think, if that was to happen again, how can we make sure that we're ready, prepared? And then there's just some more imagery of, unfortunately, more flooding in and around the city. Obviously, we are sort of working towards making sure that there's less and less of this, but unfortunately, we have to accept the fact that as well, the changing climate is bringing more adverse weather effects with it as well. So one of the main sort of ideal examples of the adaptation work that is being obviously underway is our Leeds Flood Alleviation Scheme. So as you can see there, and I'm sure many members around the room will be obviously aware of things in their own wards or the city itself, examples of where we've used the sort of flood alleviation scheme phases 1 and 2, with some more facts on the following slide about that, as well as natural flood management as well, to ensure that we're sort of making sure that it's not all about, if where possible, we are using methodologies such as that to ensure that residents and businesses are obviously protected from future adverse weather events. So just a few key facts about flood alleviation scheme to date. So at the moment, it's currently at least £200 million investment across phases 1 and 2. The most recent facts we've had, in a sense, is that we're now up to using it 9 times to protect the city since phase 1 completion in 2017. And it's actually been needed more than originally projected, which is good that it's obviously it's working, but obviously it'd be nicer if we didn't actually have to use it. And we're actually up at just over 500,000 trees that have been planted to date, which is part of our natural flood management measures. And as you can see there, obviously the important factor as well is that we're trying to use a combination of natural flood management with the engineered defences, which have obviously now that's completed as of the end of last year. And we've got over 4,000 homes and over 1,000 businesses protected against one in a 200-year flood event, allowing for expected climate change impacts. So in terms of where we are at the moment with adaptation, where we are in terms of progressing that, we did hold about just over 18 months ago, we had a climate adaptation workshop, which was for our obviously colleagues throughout the services who felt they were most on board with that area of work, and obviously understanding how they needed to future-proof their own work that they did. But what we've actually done since then is we've actually continued those workshops internally with other services. So we don't see it as almost teaching or saying you must do this. We're actually working with teams, and what's quite refreshing to see is teams are working with us to understand how they can actually integrate climate adaptation into what the work that they're doing without it becoming an extra add. It's just part of business as usual. So we actually are speaking with frontline workers and then taking it to management meetings to understand how we can actually start implementing some of the actions. And some things are just sort of, simple, different mindset of approaching, sort of, as we saw through the heat waves, what we needed to do in terms of addressing future-proofing staff and workers. From that, we actually had, I appreciate it's very small on the slide, but the top right image is actually a copy of our heatwave checklist that came out of a working group in the middle of last year. So we actually had a heatwave working group to understand what we needed to do to prepare for another heatwave. So that's an example of one of the parts of the work that we undertook. So each building now actually has a checklist, which basically identifies which buildings are immediately suitable for what areas of work. So there shouldn't be any concerns as to where people can work from. And obviously moving people around if the building is not sufficient to actually work in at high temperature. We also have, as previously mentioned, we do have our CDP accreditation that obviously we continue working with to make sure we maintain that A grade. We almost use that as effectively like it's a very useful almost audit on ourselves as to how we are progressing, what areas are quite weak in what we need to improve on. And we've also been part of the submission for the Global Destination Sustainability Index, which is measuring Leeds as a destination worldwide. So talking about how we are sustainable as a city and obviously work with other teams, not just ourselves within the council, to understand how we can do better for that as well. And I think another key part is, which I know Polly mentioned earlier, is we're keen on partnership working, which I think is always a benefit. We sort of working with the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission, as previously mentioned. We sort of liaise with the other local authorities in the region. We understand what's working well for some, what's working better for others. And it's, I know, not to coin the usual phrase of rather than reinventing the wheel, there's no point 3 or 4 different local authorities going out to do the same piece of work to come back with the same results. We might as well all work together. And as mentioned before as well, it's key in that we're all working towards the same goal. So it'd be silly to not work with each other because we're all there with the same purpose at the end. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we're keeping going, engaging with our teams, as well as obviously the wider sectors in the city as well, to sort of keep going with climate adaptation. Obviously there is still a lot of work to be done, but we are obviously progressing there, and there's a lot more understanding now within our teams that, you know, there is small changes that can be made which will make a big difference. I think, yeah, that's my final slide.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So hopefully that's been a refresher for those of you who have been part of the committee before. Hopefully it's been useful for those of you who are new. I'm going to open up to any questions for Polly and Rachel, just bearing in mind the sensitive political times that we are in. Thank you very much. Do you want to go first, Councillor Down?
Thanks, Chair. I've got a number of questions. Do you want me to ask them all and make notes, or do you want me to ask them one at a time? Ask them all. Right, and hopefully none of them are political. They're not intended to be at all. The net zero target that the cities are signed up for, is it for the council only, or is it the whole of the Leeds area? And if so, where does the airport fit into this? Because you were talking about transport. Well, the airport obviously has a huge carbon footprint. And what sort of influences can we as a council bring to bear on that? They have a commitment to come down, but I'm concerned that could, if it's part of our plan, that could scupper it, because there are things that we're not directly in control of. You were saying about other authorities getting together. Are all the other authorities in West Yorkshire signed up to this, and are they all on the same page, on the same timescale? And also, is there any opposition? I mean, I get people saying to me, I've had people come into my surgery saying climate change is just, it's all made up. It doesn't exist. Well, I don't agree with them, but I'm just wondering how that impacts on what we're trying to achieve. When you were talking about the electric charging points, how full is their capacity? Because it's all very well saying how many we've got. I've got an electric car. I don't need the electric charging points because I only charge from home. So, and I imagine that most people that can have home chargers have them because it's so much cheaper. But what are the ones that are publicly available? What is their capacity? As in, do we desperately need more, or are they hardly used? You had the 4 risks to Leeds. I immediately thought, is it just 4, or are there potentially others? And what about things like extreme cold events? For example, my solar panels don't really work when they're covered in snow. You don't get anything from them. And also I've got an air source heat pump, which I'm told doesn't go down below a certain temperature. And I haven't got down to that yet. It's always worked. But my concern is that if we're relying on things like this and there is extreme cold temperature, isn't that part of the risks? Just a quick clarification, the 500,000 trees we planted, how mature are they, and are they all within Leeds? Because I know that flooding that occurs in my ward, a lot of it is from the River Wharfe, and there's a lot of work that Yorkshire Water are doing at the source to try and put trees up there. Is that part of our target, or is that outside of ours? And then the last thing is, you referred to a 1 in 200 year flood. I know that when when Otley flood defences were built, I was told they were for a 1 in 100. We've already exceeded that twice, I think. My concern is that how accurate is the 1 in 200, and should we be looking at sort of like trying to, although a 1 in 200, we could be submerged by then, you know, how realistic is that? Sorry about that, Chair.
Thank you. Did you manage to get most of that down, Polly? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so I've written them all down and I will give my best shot. There's a couple that I'm going to have to come back on, but yeah. So in terms of the target, it's a city target, not just for the council. I think it's primarily scope 1 and 2 because I think at the time targets were set. That's what it is. That was what was happening. And because there's not the data around, actually, you could have set a target, but you'd never know if you'd got there because you wouldn't have the data to prove it. So I think it was focused around scope 1 and 2. And for that reason, when you talk about the airport, it would be about the airport's buildings, not about the flights that are happening, which is, I suspect, what you were referring to. In terms of other authorities, so our target is to go as quickly as we can to net zero by 2030. Other authorities, either at 2030 or 2038, is the West Yorkshire target. Fundamentally, the policy landscape has to be in the right place to allow us to get there. In terms of opposition, we've had some opposition, I think, come to this committee. So, you know, there is definitely opposition out there. And I think our approach to that has always been there's not many schemes, I can't think of any scheme that we do that only has the benefit of net zero. So I think it's really important that we always talk about the co-benefits. Normally there's a financial benefit. There could be a noise benefit, there could be an air quality benefit, a health benefit, a living, you know, like the housing example I gave earlier. So I think it's really important. Quite often we will lead with those co-benefits rather than net zero, because then you're not alienating people who for whatever reason don't believe in climate change. But we have to be realistic that not everybody is on the same page with that. In terms of electric charging points, we're not at a critical point in terms of capacity. We do have data, so for the different charge points that are within our control in terms of how often they're used, and I can certainly get that for you if you'd be interested. But we're not at the point that, you know, if we don't build some tomorrow, people aren't going to be able to charge their vehicles. But I think it's more about that convenience of that becomes more important. You're right that there's other risks. I think it's more where the sort of the thinking has gone in terms of what are the climate risks for the UK, and extreme cold I don't think has been identified as one. So that's why those ones have been identified in terms of work with the Met Office. So for example, you could argue that storms is an example. At the moment, the Met Office don't recognise that as there's not enough evidence at the moment that is a direct result. So in other parts of the world it is, but here they haven't made that absolute final conclusion. So that will be the reason. However, we are used to cold weather, and I think we, you know, in terms of resilience and planning, there's probably more that goes on for that than, for example, heat waves. We're probably catching up a little bit in terms of like the NHS and planning. In terms of the 500,000 figure, I think that was specifically linked to the floods management scheme, wasn't it? So that's not all the trees that are planted in Leeds. A lot of those will have been planted in the, I want to say the Calder Valley. Am I going to get this wrong? Or the Aire Valley? Aire Valley, yeah. So they've not been planted in Leeds. They've been planted upstream in order to have that effect, like you're saying. Yeah. Yeah. So it's 500,000 that Leeds have commissioned. Yeah. Although there is additional trees that have been planted in Leeds. So we have a 50 hectare target a year to plant in Leeds that happens on top of that. So that was focused more around the flood management. And the one that I can't give you an answer on, I don't know if Rachel can, is about the 1 in 200 year, because I have memories of reading that they'd modelled what it would become as opposed to what it was at that point in time. So I think some of that has been taken into account, but I can't definitively say, so I'd have to get the flood risk manager to confirm and come back to you.
The last thing on that, Chair, all I would say is that needs to be an ongoing consideration, because my concern is that if we do get more and more floods, the 1 in 100, the 1 in 200 year floods will become more frequent than that. As I say, in my ward, we've seen what should have been 1 in 100 coming 1 in 10.
Thank you. Thank you for those comprehensive answers, Polly. And on the flood risk management, we have got that as an upcoming agenda item for our forward plan. So that's something we can revisit then, I guess. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Bromley was next on the list.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that overview. There's a huge amount of information and that's really welcomed, and I'm really pleased to join this board this year. So just looking into, I don't know whether, is there a history of this board looking into misinformation and in the public domain regarding climate emergency? And if there's anything that we could do to look at tackling that misinformation via in our education of verified sites to receive information from, or how you cross-check information, and if there's a way of creating like a sort of a guidance for critical thinking among people when it comes to where they're receiving their information from. And I know I've seen something around oil companies making their websites or adverts look as though at times they are environmentally friendly, to almost create this PR and branding of in the vogue of concern, but how we then allow ourselves to actually be able to sieve amongst that information and make the right choices along the way. I wondered if that's something that we could look into at some point, or if it hasn't been already.
Thank you. Are we straying into the world of politics, or are you all right to comment on that?
I don't think it is something we've particularly looked into. I suppose we work on the basis that the council tends to be a trusted brand. So in terms of sharing information and if we share something that someone else has shared, we will be very definite that it is right and accurate. I think it's probably an issue that goes beyond just climate in terms of how we deal with misinformation. So it's maybe beyond the remit of just this. It might be more something that was suitable for something like scrutiny, or the resources scrutiny around comms. So it could be something we could flag with them, whether it's something that they've thought about. Because I think for us to tackle it just as a team would be probably beyond what we'd have the capacity to do, if I'm honest.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, if we could refer that across at some point, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just making a note of that. Councillor Tudor looks like the next person with a hand. Oh, Councillor Carlisle. Sorry, come on in then, Councillor Carlisle.
Yeah, it was just about the flood risk point, because it's one of the areas that I've sat on the boards for. My understanding is that unless the rating includes plus climate change, then a 1 in 200 rating is 1 in 200 at a certain point in time and is no longer relevant. But we keep using that same rating due to the fact that that gives you a scale against other schemes being built. So the 1 in 200 rating will be used more often than 1 in 200 times now that the effects of climate change have been felt, but it gives it a same basis of something that was built 10 years ago or 15 years ago, when that would have been 1 in 200, if that makes sense. There's a new one called 1 in 200 plus climate change, which then means it is 200 years now rather than 50 years it might be, or whatever it may be.
That's useful, thank you. I mean, the only comment that I would make is my concern is that the impacts of climate change are making our conditions worse, and we just need to be mindful of that and continue to revise and reevaluate.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. Councillor Tudor.
Just the 5 questions, Polly. Short, really. Again, if they're political, I probably won't be able to tell, so just don't answer them. Climate Action Leeds has been a 3-year programme, and I think the funding is coming to an end, certainly in Seacroft, as I understand. So I just wanted to bring that up about whether that's been considered, about how those groups can be supported to stay in existence, particularly without a hub worker. These questions aren't in any particular size of it's just as you went through your presentation. Paying people to use their own cars, is that a good thing or is that not a good thing? I wasn't sure. or whether, you know, paying people to use the bus or something. Number three, interesting to know 20% of the heat only is used, and you were saying about mandated use of heat. So if that was for other cities, will that be possible? What if they don't have a RRF like we have? Four, fitting the future and the cladding of particularly concrete houses in our ward has been really very well received. Of course, it's done in grant funding has been got in. And so you've got a lot of people who are very upset that the next street was done, but theirs wasn't. So as usual, there's at least two sides to the thing. But more a comment this really that to seek more funding for that programme to continue of insulating old stock would be very welcome. And lastly, you mentioned hosepipe ban, which always, you know, they always amuse me because in 2022, it was widely reported that Yorkshire Water was leaking 283 million litres of water a day, or 130 Olympic swimming pools a day. Obviously, we don't control Yorkshire Water, but I wonder if we can put any more pressure on to get them to plug up more of the holes. Thank you.
Thank you. As Councillor Tudor says, Polly, then please choose which of those you would like to answer.
Okay. Yeah, they were interesting. So I'm going to start with the easiest one first. So in terms of the 20% of heat, that's just because we're still in the early days of the network and growth. So obviously the plan is that we get to a much more substantial amount. You'll never use 100% of the heat because of the demand patterns and things. So you have to look at when you have your peak heat demand. In terms of mandating in other cities not having EFWs, there's other heat sources. So when we look to expand or create another network, it may not necessarily link to the energy from waste, depending on logistics and size. So you might look at waste heat from something like a data factory or an industrial process. That's becoming more normal. You might look at things like water source or ground source heat pumps. So there's lots of different technologies that can feed into that. And so the second network that we are now considering on the South Bank, actually the primary heat source will be from waste heat. And then we will look to reconnect the two networks up so it gives us better resilience, and it means that our contingency for the energy from waste won't be gas in the longer term. At the moment, we use about 3% of gas on our energy from waste network, but obviously our ultimate aim would be not to use it at all. So actually district heating can still be used, and even something like our tower blocks I talked about with the ground source heat pump, that's still considered district heating because you have one heat source that's then heating multiple different properties. You know, and in other places in Europe they use waste heat from things like crematoria, and they do their planning, so they build the crematoria next to a swimming pool, which has a big heat demand. So there's things like that you can do, or geothermal heat is something else that's starting to be explored in the northeast and still probably has potential here, but we're still in sort of earlier days of that. Yeah, so in terms of grant funding and housing, it's something that we're always just pursuing. I think we spend our life pursuing different grant streams and bids in order to do as many as we can. Quite often the criteria can be quite challenging. So we've had ones where it has to be a certain EPC of house, the householding, they have to own their own house, but the household income can't be over something like 30,000, which is quite challenging to then own your own house as well. So sometimes it can be really difficult to find the house that falls into the right criteria, and also somebody who then wants to take that up. But we will continue to pursue it, and we will continue to try and influence government policy going forward. Last one probably was slightly on the political side. All I will say is in terms of water, we will continue to work with all stakeholders across the city, and that, you know, I still think as a country we need to learn to value all the resources we use, and so actually being conscious of what we use is still important despite challenges upstream. Paying people to use their own cars, I think, you know, the reason that we do that is when, you know, we have essential car use where people are using it over a certain mileage, but it's where the job requires it. So things like social workers, for example, and actually to say to somebody to get a bus when they're going across the city and things, you just end up not being able to fulfill the role that they need to do. There is a lot of work going on looking at that grey fleet mileage, and we've seen that come down substantially since COVID and home working. There has been more examples of things like home inspections where actually they're done on a more risk rated basis, and so not every house is visited. It's, you know, there's assessments done, and some of that is driven around helping to bring that down. So I think it just depends on the different case. Climate action leave, I thought, was it 5 years, not 3?
I did think it was 3, but I think they still have some time to go. I think it's got another year beyond the local hubs, but I do know that Climate Action Leeds is seeking further funding because they've got a survey out. Any of you that are involved in hubs, local climate hubs, will maybe have received one. If not, it might be worth looking for it, because what they're looking for is evidence of where the work that they've done has made a difference, and they're going to be using that, as far as I understand, to seek further funding. Okay, any more hands? Councillor Rafiq.
So on that last point about the water companies, I know it's not within the remit of this board to kind of start looking at the work they're doing and the water leakage and all that, which Councillor Tudor's referred to. But I think the Housing Environment Scrutiny Board could actually ask them to come and not just look at that, but also look at things like water pollution and all that. That's certainly, I think, is within that board's remit, as you know, to do that. But that's something, you know, if any members sit on that, we can ask the chair to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stables.
I don't know if you're going to be able to answer any of these or not, so I'll ask you anyway. Just you have to say if you can't. So in terms of the Leeds Pikes plan, I'd just like to know, given actually just coming back to that point about only 20% of the heat's currently being used, I know there is some kind of rollout plan, but it'd be interesting to know more about that. Flood risk mitigation. I'd like to know sort of when we're going to hear more about it, and I'm very aware of the work that's been done around, is it the Aire Valley, the big bit of work, but I haven't heard much about the River Wharf, and it was just picking up at that point. Actually, obviously we've had many years of serious flooding issues on the River Wharf. I'd like to know more about what's being done on that, and I don't know whether there are plans, you know, what the plans are. And my last question actually was about air quality, because that's not been mentioned at all, and just be interested to know how that kind of fits into the plans, and if we'll get an update on that, please.
Just trying to look to see if I could tell you how many customers we had on our list, and I can't. So in terms of district heating, we've got, I think, 15 customers now signed up, with a total of 53 buildings taking heat. But from memory, we've got about 40. I'll confirm the figure afterwards, so I give you an accurate figure, but there's about 40 odd customers that are on the list waiting to join up. So that could be because they're only at planning stage and they haven't built the building they want to connect to. It's not because they're waiting and we're being slow. It's because of when the timing's right for them. So there is a pipeline to kind of increase. It's really difficult to say where that will get us to in terms of heat demand, because what we found with some of our earlier customers is people are really cautious about their heat demand. So they always tell you sort of 20% higher. And then we have to do a lot of data analysis to see where that lands. So until you actually connect the customers up, it's quite challenging. But we've got some quite big connections that are due to come on stream in the next couple of years. So that 20% will move quite quickly. But I'm happy to come back with a more factual in terms of number of customers and likely demand. And then flood risk, I can't answer if I'm honest, it's not my area of specialism, but I think we have got that as a proposed one for the forward plan. So I think it would be best to explore that with Jonathan when he's here. In terms of air quality, it still falls within my remit. So we've still done an annual report on air quality, and we look, so for example, district heating, one of the co-benefits of that is improving air quality because you're taking gas boilers out of the city centre, so which is one source of pollutants. But what we have seen is an improvement year on year in terms of air quality, especially in terms of NOx. What we're starting to look at more closely is actually indoor air quality. And if you look at a lot of the things that are happening at a national public health level, that is where people are saying actually the focus should be, which starts to focus more on things like the cleaning products that people are using in their homes. The fact of what they're cooking with, if they're using gas, the fact that you're keeping your oven clean, which was slightly concerning for me. That there are sort of good practice in ventilation of your own home and things like that. So there's more work happening about that kind of education piece, and things like wood burners, which at one point were seen as sort of a good environmental move. But the reality is actually they cause quite a lot of indoor air pollution and can cause sort of health issues for the people that have actually got them in their homes as opposed to the people around. And then there's also work in terms of particulate matter and looking at that and monitoring. But actually some of the targets that have been set by things like the World Health Organization, actually, I think at a national level would say they aren't achievable within the country's remit, because we actually get things coming over from other countries as well in terms of we even talk about Saharan desert coming across and actually counting towards our particulate matter. So sometimes it's weather conditions and things that come across. So our aim as a council is to continually focus on air quality and improve it and take actions that improve it, which is what you see in terms of some of the transport schemes around the city, but also to be conscious actually of where we can, of how far we can go and how realistic we can be in that, but also about that communication and engagement. So we've done a lot of work. So we did a conference last year, might even been the year before now, with medical professionals. So trying to upskill medical professionals in terms of, they knew that air quality was an issue for like an asthma patient, but actually they were less confident about how to advise people to avoid poor air quality. So things like, walking one street away and greener routes and which side of the road and things like that. So we did a conference on that. We've also done things like where we've got a medical alert system now in place to help people avoid. So some of it's about education and how people can take their own responsibility. Some of it is about how we drive it down as a city.
Just come back, sorry. I'd also be interested to know, I don't know if we could cover this in another session perhaps, but about how we're monitoring it as a council across the whole of the city. So not just the city centre, but what about all the outlying areas? You won't be surprised to me to mention Wetherby, but all the other areas that where pollution is actually rising, not reducing. So I'd be interested to look at that.
Thank you. I was just looking for any hands. Councillor Downs.
Quickly following on from what Councillor Stowell said, the River Wharf, the flood defences at Otley, were actually, there was a picture of them in the slide presentation you did, I think, in the top left hand side. There's like a flood wall that's been built, which then keeps the water behind it before it floods some houses in Otley, where the river was bursting its bank. My concern was, when I was talking about earlier about the 100-year, is that there's a chance that it could top it within the next 100 years on potentially more than one occasion, I believe. And when it was put in, please don't take this as political, but I actually asked, are we doing the right thing? Is it extendable? Because if it does get worse, we may need to build it bigger, because my big concern was I didn't think we got it big enough.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. Any more hands? Oops, sorry, that's me not being able to see you all with my my temporary glasses on. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Polly and Rachel, for the presentation. I do hope you found it useful, and thank you for all your questions. I just had a couple of comments particularly for new members, that one of the things that we do on a rolling programme as part of this committee is we invite each director to come along to a meeting. There isn't anybody today, but there will be going forwards. And one of the things that we have looked at is what are we going to ask them to focus on? So just picking up on some of the things that were in Polly and Rachel's presentation, we are this year going to be focusing on procurement, which looks at the scope 3 emissions, and on the work that's going on with adaptation. So you'll see that revisited as we go through and we talk to directors. So please feel free to ask them questions that are relevant to their directorate when they arrive. Okay, thank you very much. So with no more questions, I will move on to our next item. And again, it's over to Polly and Rachel. And this is a look at our forward plan.
Would you like a copy of it on the screen, Chair? Just for
if you've got one, that
Yeah.
would be good to see. Thank you.
Is that okay?
I suppose just to give a quick overview, so we've just tried to come up with things that are a mix across both mitigation and adaptation, and are outward looking and inward looking. So you'll see that Yorkshire Water would have been on the agenda for today, but for obvious reasons we decided that that probably wasn't appropriate. So we've kind of pulled together a forward plan, and I suppose for today it's really just seeking comments whether there's things on there that you wouldn't be interested in, whether there's things on there that you think are missing, and then it just reflects that the obvious, like the open forum update each time, but also the director update, and we've talked about the procurement side, but last year we asked them to come and talk to us about their grey fleet, which is the usage of cars that are staff, where we're paying for staff to use cars, and how they're trying to bring that down in adaptation as well. So it's if there's any specific elements other than procurement that you wanted to bring out, but I think other than that it's really just comments and suggestions.
So are you able to kind of roll through it slowly? I guess you've all got a copy, haven't you, that you can see as well. So maybe just take a minute to have a look at the things that are on there. And then is there anything that you would like to see? Any comments on what we've already got planned for you?
I suppose just to add as well that obviously we will have throughout the year as well. This doesn't include items that will be discussed on the workshops, which were previously the working groups. So obviously the workshops will be there to talk about more topics in detail, which then might be brought forward as part of these items on the main committee as well. So it's just to add that in there as well, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Rachel. So Councillor Anderson is indicated first, if you want to come in.
It's more just something that we referred to after about the working groups. Now, most councillors who were here last year, and a number of councillors who joined recently, we got sent an email from a woman called Susanna MH, who the chair has met, and I've met as well, and she has a different view. I think it's probably a nice way of putting it. And what I'm suggesting is, could we have a subgroup meeting, so it's not done in public, right? Where we could have a debate between their view and the university's view, which then addresses the concerns that Councillor Bromley made about misinformation. And we can talk about these things, because there are also some councillors who overstate the case a bit sometimes as well. I understand why. No, I'm not looking at you. Not looking at you. Not looking at you. It just so happens I'm looking in that general direction. I mean, you know, all right. I can sit and look like that. It makes no difference who I look at. I mean, I'm sorry about my face. I've got the face I've got. But what I was looking for is, you know, could that be one of our subgroup discussions where we get someone from the university, for example, to come in, and also this person who wants to invite a doctor who's got various comments on it, to have a debate. Now, for those of you who can't remember, you were sent an email and they highlighted in it all of the things that we agreed to as a council back in 2019, and then disputing where the evidence came from, right? So I think we need to revisit that and get clarity on what is happening, because the world has moved on as well. Science has moved on. People's understanding as to what climate change is. In 2019, if you'd asked residents about climate change, they would probably think that we were going to be in for warm, hot summers every single time. I think we've proved that one is a myth, to be quite frank. And so it's the perceptions that we've got to get out there. And I think we would benefit from a debate between, actually, I'm lucky, unlucky, call it what you like, but along with the chair, I go to a lot of the Yorkshire and Humber things remotely as well. And so there's a lot of debate and discussion goes on there, and not everybody can be part of it, to be quite frank. And I think it would be a way of everybody hearing the same arguments and then reaching our own conclusions, and we can challenge those people's understandings or misunderstandings or misinterpretations or misinformation that people are putting out. Because whether we like it or not, comments like this are out there, and we've got to, and it's just getting partly political, but it was how to tackle climate change on the doorstep, how you go about trying to talk to people by empathizing with them, etc., etc. So I do think, as politicians, we've also got to how we can present ourselves on the doorstep when we're debating it, so that we can understand where some people are coming from. And I just think this would be a good thing for us as a committee, not in a public session, I emphasize, not in a public session, but in a private meeting where we've decided to do things. Anybody's views are, I'm just suggesting, because I met this person and I said, well, I would bring it to it. They'd already met with, I think she's already met with Polly, and she's also met with the chair as well. There are differences of opinion, I'll be honest with that. I mean, so I'm not after a row or an argument. I'm just after a debate where we can put everything on the table and we can sort things out. That's what I'm looking for.
So we've got several people want to come in on that one. Councillor Carlisle, Councillor Bromley was your hand up too, and Councillor Downs. So we'll start with Councillor Carlisle.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's one that I'm not sure on, in a way, because I think in this panel our aim is to advise the executive on steps that we can help with in moving forward where the council has decided it is and where the council would like to be. And I always get a bit uptight in this group if we decide to somehow move 2 steps back to going back over the argument about what we should do. I somewhat feel that it's our job to help the council move forward in the direction we've chosen, rather than start debating what that direction is endlessly. So I'm a bit concerned that we'd be going back into a debate about whether we're facing the right way, rather than supporting the council to get there as fast as we possibly can. I don't know what other members think about it, but I think certainly when we've been in here before and we've ended up with a debate about targets, whether they're right, whether they're wrong, and various other things, we've not really got anywhere by the end of it. But I think we've all got an agreement of where we need to get to, and our job best seems to be supporting the executive with getting there as fast as possible and ideas to get there. I'd be a bit worried if we went over in endless debates about the rights and wrongs of where we're heading, then we wouldn't be doing that job as best as we could.
Thank you. Councillor Bromley.
I was actually just going to respond that actually I think the more information that we can gather, the better as individuals. So regardless of the fact that we've been elected as councillors doesn't mean that we've all been given the same amount of information in order to get here. And I think that being part of this is such a vital, crucial part of our development in society going forward, that actually we need to be educated as much as possible if we're part of decision making. However, I do also take Councillor Carhal's point of rather than actually it being about political debate. So maybe in terms of Councillor Anderson's taking it offline so that it's not something that's part of a political debate, it's something that is just information forming, then I would be in favour of something like that.
Thank you. Councillor Downs.
This actually what comes back to my first set of questions when I was saying about people with opposition. And part of the reason why I asked some of my questions was that I had information so that the people that come to me challenging my stance on climate change, I've got the answers to. And the ones that I asked today, I'm very happy that I've got the answers that I can go back with. I think it's important that we as councillors have that information so that we can do that side of the council's work to promote it. There is a political debate which I will mention but not go into, that there are some political people that will say there is no climate change, and that is their stance. They have been elected. That is their right to have that stance. However, we are the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee. We are advising on that. To be on this committee, really, you've got to be of a mind that actually we are looking at finding the solutions and advising on them. That is our role. I'm very happy to listen to other people's concerns so that we can actually understand, sympathise, and almost definitely ultimately say, look, this is my belief, that's your belief, I'm going with my belief because I've got the evidence that I need to move forward. I'm not sure what the merits of having that debate with somebody that probably will not listen to anything that we do or say, as long as we are aware of their points, and the points have been raised to all of us as members, and we can then raise them with the chair and with Polly to say, these are the concerns that have been brought to us by residents. Can you give us the answer? And then it's down to us as councillors to decide whether those answers that we have been given are correct, or whether we want to challenge them further and make sure that we're absolutely crystal clear in the advice that we are being given. So that we can then go back to the resident. And I had a stand-up argument with, this was all born out of a councillor surgery where we got, in Otley, we got ambushed by 3 people that were absolutely adamant there is no climate change. And whatever you said to them, you could not win the argument because they were so blinkered. But what I have done is I've challenged what they've said to make sure that my position I'm very happy with, and I am happy with it. And that's my feelings.
Thank you. Councillor Harrington.
Yeah, it was just to say really that if we were able to find more information, which would be like myth busting, to put for us to then recommend that that kind of information went out from us to say, yes, there are some things that people believe about it. I'm not saying we rehearse the whole thing, but if we actually did have a list of the main issues and say, well, this is what some people believe, but this is what our advisors and the reason why we took those decisions, this is where we are with it. And then we could possibly put a sort of suggest to the executive that we put that information out as a briefing to the public, basically. And then that would resolve your issue with people not having the information that they need to make a decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Polly.
So could we take one of the workshops then and look at sort of the comms and engagement side and use it to think about it from those who may be more in opposition, and look at, like you say, the myth busting and what those frequently sort of frequent things that you're hearing, so that we've got a list, and then we can help find that evidence base to support. So we could do that, and then it also helps, I suppose, to improve carbon literacy as well. So it picks up on your point. So we could do it from that way. I think it would work for everyone.
Very difficult how to word that and not be political about it today, because in other words, keep it as broadly neutral as I possibly could, because it's very easy to get involved in the politics of it one way or the other, whether no matter which side of the argument you're on. And I find it very difficult. And at least we've had a debate on it. That's all I was trying to do, which is earlier this year, because let's be quite frank, most of our meetings, the first ones of every year, are just setting our agenda for the year to come. I'm not saying you don't need to have it until next April or anything like that. I'm just suggesting we put it on the work.
Thank you. Well, thank you for raising it. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. Are people happy that we look at that we look at a workshop on kind of comms and myth busting and information and things like that? Okay, so that's one thing. We got that on the workshop agenda. Anybody else got any comments on the items that you've seen as part of our forward plan? Councillor Stables.
Can we add the air quality thing on, please? The air quality discussion or information, please.
So on that point that Councillor Stables has mentioned, when you said about air quality, can we also include the airport, because there are potential issues with air quality there?
Thank you. So that is something that we've discussed before. We've had items on air quality, haven't we? But yeah, we can put that on. So we've had suggestions around things that people want adding. Anything else that people would like us to look at? Councillor Carlill.
In the last meeting, was it? We asked for suggestions, and one of the points I put in was around, I know many of us will have had some communications about pesticide use in the tree planting and such. I'm choosing to imagine that that is in part of the tree planting and maintenance update that's coming.
Thank you. Have we got that far, Rachel, in terms of exactly what's in the tree planting and maintenance? And if we haven't, can it go in?
I think it's kind of, as you said, it's kind of all envelopes within that, but we can definitely make sure it's included. Okay, anyone else? Councillor Anderson.
What are WICA up to on this? Because they've got a whole committee that looks into climate change. What are they talking about? Is there anything that we can work with them on? Is there anything that we can learn from them? Have they got well, I know they do have their hands on money that we would like to get our hands on. So is there anything we can do about that?
Rachel, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, so what we've got is we've got so some of these topics are actually, they're not just confined to officer updates within internally. We're actually going to make sure that they actually talk to people if it is relevant. So like WICA, so such as we had the talk about businesses last year and mass transit. If it's a relevant topic, then we're going to make sure that there is representatives internal and external, just so it gives a rounder picture. So we'll make sure if it is appropriate, we'll have people in as well to talk about that.
The option on the climate commission as well,
Yeah.
I think, are equally as well.
That's right. Yeah.
Polly sits on one of them, might be.
So we have got the Yorks and Humber Climate Commission already on, and I sit on the WICA committee, and a lot of the things that we discuss do fit with a lot of the work that WICA's doing. So the Better Homes Hub and decarbonisation and a lot of that stuff feeds in. And as Rachel say, we do have directly some feedback from WICA. In fact, we had transport at the last committee meeting, didn't we? So you're right, it's sometimes difficult to know where everything kind of fits together, but I would say I think that's something that we are aware of and have so far done a reasonable job of.
Thank you. Apologies. Things keep occurring to me. It was just after Barry's question. One of the things that's coming up at the combined authority is the local transport plan, which is the West Yorkshire transport strategy. That is essentially then above the Leeds transport strategy. I wonder whether either as part of the consultation for the scoping of that was supposed to be going out next week, I believe, but has had to be postponed for reasons that I'm sure we're all aware of. But when that comes out, maybe it might be something that this committee might like to see and make a view on, because it will be setting based on that, the ideas that we have around the targets that come out of that, all transport spend funding that comes through the mayor, of which most of it now does, will then be aligned to the targets in that local transport plan. And I think it might be useful if we were able to put our steer on that from a climate perspective.
I think that's a really good idea. Yeah. People nodding in agreement. Yeah. So yeah, definitely think that's something we should look at. Councillor Stables.
Following on from that, I'm just trying to think how this all fits together, but within the whole looking at the transport strategy, I'd like to see the link of presumably we're going to be looking at the link with that with air quality. I mean, I know I'm talking about the same things, but they're kind of all interrelated. But you know, from the outer areas, I'm really interested to see how we can reduce the climate emissions by reducing the transport from the outer areas, which aren't currently included really in the transport strategy currently. But I think absolutely need to be if we're going to reduce the overall emissions of the city. So it's I don't know how we do that, because it's kind of adding another level, if you have a bit like the onion skin, isn't it? It's the outer skin of the onion, because we're focused very much on the inner bit, which is obviously the first bit to focus on. But when do we get to look at the outer bit?
Is that something that could link with an item on the local transport plan, that we could kind of pull those together? Do you think anybody want to comment on that yet? Rachel, you think that's possible? Polly thinks that's possible. So yeah, okay, we can look at that together. Anybody else with any comments? Councillor Ray?
Oops. I don't know whether this is relevant, so just tell me I'm off beam, but food security and insecurity, I assume that's with the cascade effect that you were describing, but how much of an impact could that have on, I was watching listening to the Archers, and they're very worried about it, but in my day job I run Kirksall Valley Farm, and the impact of the climate over the last couple of years on food production on that small scale has been dramatic. You know, the season this year is running massively behind what it would have done normally, because it's been cold and it's been wet. The heat wave had a massive effect on veg growing, and I just wondered, is that relevant to us?
It's relevant. I suppose the challenge is it's not something that we have a direct impact on, so it's whether we can find somebody to talk to us about it, but then it's also what we can do to influence it. So I suppose that's the challenge, is more about actually what can we do differently that would help. So it might be somebody like the National Farmers Union might want to come and speak to us about some of the challenges, but I suspect a lot of what they'd be asking for might be more at a national policy level than local. So we'd probably have to do a bit of research on that before we sort of commit one way or the other, to make sure that we can keep it within the focus of the committee.
Thank you. Anybody else with any suggestions? Okay, so Rachel, have you got all that? Is that all okay? Brilliant. Okay, so thank you all for your contributions. So that brings us to kind of the end. There were just a few things that I wanted to pick up on before we finish. So the first one kind of links to what we've just been talking about in terms of workshops and agenda items. So for new members, we run the workshops as non-public meetings, and we invite any councillor along to those. So that's one thing that makes them different from this committee meeting. As SEAC members, you're very welcome to attend all of them. Clearly, I know with all our own time commitments, that's not always possible, but please share them amongst your ward colleagues and invite people along and ask them, if there's something that they're particularly interested in, to come along, because some of them we have really good attendance and we have a really good debate, and some of them not so many people come. And well, we do. We have had some brilliant debates with just a few of us. But in terms of making good use of officer time and actually making some recommendations, the more people we have, the better. So I really encourage you to do what you can to attend them, but also to share them. Another thing I just wanted to mention again, particularly for new members, we're going to finish very early today because it was a slightly strange meeting. But normally we allocate 3 hours, and we won't go over 3 hours, but we may, if we have some quicker items, finish early. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. That's how much time I'd like you to allocate. Yes, please do.
On I guess a couple of occasions, certainly those of us in Outer Northwest have community committee meetings, I think, in the afternoon. So if it goes on for 3 hours, we might be a bit tight for time to get out in time. Committed as we are, but it's just something to bear in. I'm not saying change any of those dates. I'm just saying we need to maybe watch when that is going to lead to a particular conflict, because if 3 of us are walking out part of the way through one, it doesn't look good publicly. And we're then not necessarily contributing to the debate as well as we could do. It is an issue. Let's say he's going to change the date and time we're having them all.
I'm changing it completely. I think the meetings are looking to be in the evening times, but we can preempt that with the meetings that come up and then change that around. I'm assuming other community committees are also on Mondays. I'm not too sure. I'm not entirely sure how the schedules will work.
Well, the Inner East one isn't. I think are we on Thursday, Councillor Tudor? Anyway, please raise it in advance of the meeting with me. If there's something that you need to go to, and I'll try and be a bit tighter about the time in terms of making sure that we move through it a bit more quickly. And then just my final thing was, if any of you, particularly new members, have any questions or anything that you read the papers and it doesn't make sense, or there's something that you'd like to see, or anything that we haven't made really clear to you, please just get in touch with me. I'd hate for people to be coming along and thinking that I don't know what that thing is, or I'm sure we can get you some information on anything, because I'd rather you be really well informed and then be able to ask good questions. So please approach me about anything. And then the last thing is, the meeting for the next committee meeting is down as a consultative meeting, i.e. not in person. I'm really keen for us to move to in-person meetings. I think that we get a much better quality of meeting when people are here rather than online. So it's going to be in person here at Civic, not a remote meeting. Okay. Thank you very much. That is the end of today's meeting. Thank you. Thank you for everybody who attended. Hope you found it useful, and thanks for your contributions. Thanks, officers.